Well, good afternoon. Today we're going to dive into a pretty serious topic, and it's a question that I think is an excellent question that Christians often wrestle with in various contexts. In fact, we've addressed this question in our Wednesday evening study on Mere Christianity, and I'd encourage you to revisit that. The first few videos we talked about objective morality and the problem of evil. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, the problem of evil. But the context, as I said, changes depending on the evil that we see, the suffering that we endure. We raise those questions in different ways, and they take on different emotional expressions. And so I want to be sensitive to that today. But this question was framed in the context of human trafficking. Now, you would have to be living in a cave to have not heard of the news of what's going on with the Jeffrey Epstein case with his companion there and partner in crime being arrested and documents being unsealed, and some big names, some political figures, some celebrities being linked with human trafficking, especially in the exploitation of children, which is particularly alarming and troubling and should make us sick to our stomachs. We should just pray for justice, sharp punishments for all involved. The truth would be revealed. But the question was, how can things like this happen? And of course, this problem is not just reserved for the rich and famous or for that one area in which that was taking place. Today, there are over 40 million victims of human trafficking, men, women, and children. And this happens all around the world. We see stories of this surrounding big events such as the Super Bowl, in which human trafficking task forces target the exploitation of children and the increase in prostitution and prostitution arrests. And so these kinds of things are prevalent in our culture, and I think too often we look past those. But the question was, how can God allow such a great evil as this to exist? And make no mistake about this, this is evil. And the Bible treats slavery, and that's what human trafficking is. It treats it as a great evil. We recall that when Israel was groaning in Egyptian captivity, in slavery, that God heard their cries and he delivered them. And so we wonder, how can we be like God? How can we strive for the sort of things that God desires us to do, that are an extension of his character, that reflect what he is like? Then we need to be setting the prisoners free. We need to do the best we can to contend with this perverse and evil, systematic exploitation of people that is so very present in our world. I do want to make a few notes about evil itself for just a few moments, because that's the way that the question was, how can God tolerate this particular evil? And that really appeals to the fact that there is an objective moral standard. I trust that all people everywhere would agree that slavery is wrong, that human trafficking is wrong, that even those who are engaged in that practice would recognize the great evil of that. They just simply choose to ignore their conscience, but they know in their heart of hearts that what they are doing is evil and that they deserve to be punished for it. Now, when we raise this issue, we are appealing to an objective moral standard. We are saying that there is a moral law for all people at all places at all times by which we are called to obey. That means in any society, slavery is wrong. Human trafficking is wrong in every and any society, regardless of how people feel about it, regardless of how many people are participating in it. We don't look back at slavery in America in the 17 and 1800s and even before that. We don't look at that and say, well, that's just a product of their time, so it's okay. No, we condemn those actions. And as America, we've done better, and we strive to do even better. But when we look at an objective moral standard, we recognize that this is consistent with a Christian worldview, but it is inconsistent with an atheistic or even a naturalistic worldview. I'm going to quote Michael Ruse, who is a philosopher of science, and I got this quote from a William Lane Craig article that I will put in the description to this video. And he says, "Morality is a biological adaptation, no less than our hands and feet and teeth, considered as a rationally justifiable set of claims about an objective something. Ethics is an illusion. I appreciate when someone says, love thy neighbor as thyself. They think they are referring above and beyond themselves. Nevertheless, such reference is truly without foundation. Morality is just an aid to survival and reproduction, and any deeper meaning is an illusion. So what he's saying there is ethics, they're an illusion. They're not real. They're not really grounded on anything. So all people at all times, at all places, are not bound by some standard. That's problematic. If we look at the Holocaust, for instance, would we agree that that is a great evil? Well, we should. All reasonable people should agree that that's a great evil. Human trafficking, these pedophiles who are traveling to Epstein's Island and everything that took place, that's a great evil. That should make us angry, righteously angry. We should strive to end all sorts of systems that allow for that. We should promote strict punishment. Now, the unbelieving world, even if they give lip service to ethics and morality, because they don't ground that on anything, it ultimately is meaningless and morality becomes relevant, and we see that evil becomes condoned in different formats. And I'm not saying that if somebody's an atheist by any means that they condone this sorts of action, but I'm saying that their worldview does not support an answer, an objective morality by which we ought to condemn such actions. And so with that, we understand that Christians do appeal to an objective moral standard. We have objective moral values because morality is grounded in the person and works of Jesus Christ. We find in Leviticus 19:2, it says, "Be holy, for I am holy." And we see this line repeated several places in Scripture. God is the standard of morality. And because God does not change, our moral values, our moral duties do not change either. At the same point, we recognize that this world is a fallen world and that sin temporarily reigns. We find that sin has reigned since Adam. We find in Romans chapter 5. We know that all people have fallen short of the glory of God in Romans 3:23. And that takes on, of course, various forms of evil. Now, because we believe that God is not just the moral standard, but he's also the judge, we know that there is real punishment. That those who die without being punished, they didn't get away with it. By no means. God doesn't look on what's happening and say, well, that's just the way it is and there's nothing I can... No, God punishes evil. Proverbs 11:21 says, "Assuredly, the evil man will not go unpunished." So as a Christian, we can find comfort in that. And I understand the complaints of, well, people are suffering here. What good is it that there's punishment in eternity to come? I'm sensitive to that. I'm going to talk a little bit about evil a little bit more in a few moments. I do want to address this fact that those who harm children, I believe, receive even harsher punishment. We do see a gradation of punishment in Scripture, that those who do greater evil are punished even more severely. And I think that those who harm children are punished to just horrendous level. I cannot imagine the horror that would be standing before the Lord God Almighty, having committed some of the atrocities that people have in the history of the world. And Jesus said in Matthew 18:6, talking about people causing a stumbling block between children and them coming to faith in him. And that is one of the things that exploitation of children does, by the way, as a consequence, is that people doubt, of course, the existence of God. They doubt God's love, the love that other people have for them. And Matthew 18:6 says, "If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea." This is not God just using kind of locker room talk where he's just giving some kind of macho speech where he's saying, well, I'm going to do this and huffing and puffing, but not actually. No, God is saying the creator of all the earth, who spoke everything into existence by the power of his word. He's saying it'd be better for them if a rock was tied around their neck and they were thrown in the sea. The kind of horror that is reserved for them is beyond our comprehension. It talks at the end of Isaiah, the last few verses of Isaiah 66, it talks about people being consumed by fire day in and day out throughout all eternity. And that's just one visualization of the horror that such people face. With that, though, why do we see evil in this world? And this is what we've dealt with in Mere Christianity. As I said in the first few chapters, I'd encourage you to go back, and I'm going to link some resources to this video because we just have a few minutes to dive into this. But I do want us to understand that we do live in a fallen world, and people do horrific things. And we might wonder, why doesn't God just stop them? Why doesn't God force them to change their way and live righteous lives? Why doesn't God immediately intervene in all of these instances? I want us to understand that we live in the best possible world. And that's tough for us to fathom because there is such evil in this world, things that we probably can't even comprehend or wouldn't even want to if we could. But this is still the best possible world. We live in a world in which people have freedom to choose, to do right or to do evil. And in order for us to have real freedom, that freedom to love, freedom to pursue happiness, freedom to choose whether or not to worship God, freedom to choose whether or not we will treat people with dignity and respect. Because we have freedom to do those things, because God did not desire to create us as robots. He wanted to create us as rational beings who have a free will. Because of that, we necessarily had to have the freedom to choose to do evil, all sorts of evil, even the most perverse and wicked possible things. In fact, we find in Romans 1 that it tells us that God gave people over to the things that they desire, and he allows them to pursue those things, not because he's condoning those things, not because he's not going to punish those things, but because people have free will, because that's the best possible world. Because they do have that free will, they can choose for a season to do horrifically wicked things. We find in the Garden of Eden that God placed a tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil there. And that for us is very important because it helps us understand that God gave people the capacity to choose to do right or wrong, but he also allows them to walk in that freedom. So people recognize that there's a right and wrong. People have the freedom to choose one or the other, and there will be consequences for choosing not to obey him. God does love us, and he desires that we make the right choices. But oftentimes in people's wickedness, they make horrific choices. When we approach a topic such as human trafficking, we should be grieved. We should be enraged. But we should also understand that there is ultimately punishment to come. We don't speak of punishment to come, though, just as in eternity to come. We need to understand that right now we have a mission to accomplish, that as God's people, we shouldn't just scroll past stories on human trafficking on social media and say, well, I wish I could do something about that. I'm going to share some resources again in the description of this video of how you can get involved. There's one organization, globalministries.org, I'd encourage you to visit. I'm not an expert on human trafficking, but I have read quite a bit about it, and I've supported various ministries, my family and I, throughout the years, doing our best to try to come alongside and support ministries that tackle this very complex and difficult sin issue in our world. And on that site, they provide denominational resources and links. It's not exhaustive, but links to different resources, organizations you could financially support. And they also list a number of steps you could take to fight human trafficking. One is to pray with individuals and others. The next is to raise awareness. Now, I want to make sure that we don't stop there. And I'm just going to say this about raising awareness. People think that they're doing something by raising awareness and just posting something on social media, for instance. And it does bring some alertness, and that's good, especially in the event that, say, a child is being exploited in your area, and if people become aware that that's even a problem, they might look out for the warning signs of that. So there's real value. But let's not just stop there. See, human trafficking is stigmatized. People know that this is evil. People recognize that. So if we just say, well, this is evil and that's it, well, people will nod and then they'll just move on. We need to actually equip people to recognize the threat and then to actually address it. So with that, churches are encouraged and organizations to hold workshops and informational meetings. And I think that'd be something great for our church to do in the future. To get our children and youth involved, to help them to understand some very real risks of human trafficking, even in our communities. This isn't something that just happens out there. It happens in all communities. Children need to know, for instance, and there's a lot of things they need to know, but this is just one, for instance, they need to understand that good adults don't ask them to keep secrets. Adults don't ask them to keep secrets. There are clear boundaries that your children need to understand, that people don't say certain things. They certainly don't touch them in any area. And so we need to make sure we're communicating those things with our children. Those are tough conversations to have with kids. And I have 3 little kids. So I understand, but my two oldest ones, I have had those discussions with. What are clear boundaries? What are things that adults should never say to you or ask you to do, or any secrets? No adult ever asks you to keep a secret. That's a very important one. I'd encourage you to talk to your kids about that, to support legislative action. Right now, it takes about 5 minutes to write an email to a congressman, to a senator, to the president. I would encourage you to do that. And by the way, this is not a political question and answer session, but today, related to this topic, the Trump administration gave $35 million to survivors of human trafficking. I praise that. That is a wonderful thing. And regardless of how you feel about Trump and all that, you should celebrate that also. We should be doing the best we can as people who are pro-life, as people who care about this topic, to supporting the victims of human trafficking. They need a place to live. They need food. They need to be able to get their feet back on the ground. There are organizations, even locally, relatively locally. I'm aware of one in Columbus, Ohio. She has a name that you could support that does things like this. It says you could contact the National Human Trafficking Resource Hotline if you suspect somebody's being trafficked. You can encourage companies to promote fair labor practices, and they provide a link there for you. You can consume wisely and ethically, and I'll encourage you to do that. There are countries that are engaged in gross human rights violations. We need to stand up against that. We need to recognize that there are some companies that exploit children, that exploit people of all ages. We need to not give them our money. And as I said, we can give our money to support ministries that help people get reestablished, that fight human trafficking in various ways. Christians throughout the history of Christianity have done a great job of fighting against human trafficking. William Wilberforce, if you'd read his story and see how he fought slavery in England, there are many examples like that. So I would encourage you to follow that example, to recognize that there is real evil, there's objective evil, there is an objective moral standard, there's a law, and it's written on our hearts. It is evident in nature. There is real punishment. God isn't just looking at this and saying, well, it's okay, and that's the way it's going to be. There's going to be real consequence. At the same time, people do have freedom to do things that are tremendously evil. In our liberty, in our freedom, we need to fight against human trafficking as God's people. Well, I hope this has been helpful for you today. I look forward to sharing with you more next week. As always, if you have a question that you'd like me to answer, please share that in the comments section or write to me personally. There's all kinds of ways to get a hold of me, but I'd love to answer your questions. May God bless you.